Okay, you guys, in this video, we're going to learn about the 3 different types of muscle found in the body. And then we're going to specifically look at the makeup of skeletal muscle, which will be the main muscle that we discuss as we work through this foundation of anatomy part 2. So let's go to our handout here. So there's 3 types of muscle in the body. There's cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle. Now, probably you may or may not have heard of any of these, and it's okay. Like I said, the one that we're going to concentrate on the most is skeletal muscle, right? So skeletal muscle is the muscle that makes up the most of the muscle that surrounds and works in conjunction with the skeletal system. There's also 2 other types of muscle in the body. So the first of those 2 is cardiac muscle. So the name itself gives away where it is. So cardio is related to the heart. So cardiac muscle cells are found only in the heart of the body, and they're very specialized cells that work to contract the heart so that the heart can pump the blood through the body. It works in an involuntary fashion. So you don't even have to think about this. The heart does this on its own. There's no conscious control of actually making the heart beat, which is a good thing. So if we got to think about that all the time, something might go wrong. The second one of the other 2 is called smooth muscle cells. So smooth muscle, the reason it's called smooth muscle is because it's built a little bit differently than the skeletal and the cardiac muscles. So you can see in both of these muscles here, they sort of striations or lines through them. And that's a specialization of these cells. Smooth muscle doesn't have that. And smooth muscle is found primarily in our organs in the body, as well as our blood vessels. And it is just like cardiac muscle in that it's under involuntary control. You don't have to think about it. Working, it automatically does it for you. So the best example of this is in our GI system with our small intestines and large colon, right? So, or the colon, the small and the large bowel. So there's this process called peristalsis, and we'll talk about this when we get into the GI system. But peristalsis is this movement of the muscle of those organs to help facilitate digestion and movement of the food through our body so we can digest it and then eventually eliminate it. And you don't think about it, but the bowels actually have this wave-like fluid motion that happens. It's really hard for us to even notice it happening in our body. But that's how the food gets moved through the system, and so that we can digest appropriately and then eliminate. So cardiac muscle, heart, skeletal muscle, the one that we're going to be talking about that moves all of our limbs and is associated with our skeleton, and then smooth muscle, our organs and our blood vessels. Now we want to know a little bit more about skeletal muscle. Not that you have to remember this, but it's good to know that what does skeletal muscle look like? So I'll make this a little bit bigger here. So here is a diagram of the bicep, right? You guys are pretty familiar with what this looks like. It's usually this red sort of middle section of a muscle, and then you learned in our other section what these white pieces are coming off, right? So these are the tendon, right? And then we call this the body of the muscle. And you can see when we take a cross section of that, we come down here and we look at what that looks like. It's actually a whole bunch of bundles put together, sort of stacked on top of and around each other. And then if we were to take the muscle bundle and make it and look a little bit more, so zoom in a little bit more, we see the next layer. And that is called the fascicle. Then, and you can see that there's a whole bunch of little things inside the fascicle, right? So we come down here, and now what we've done is we're looking at that, and it's a muscle fiber. So this is the actual muscle cell. And then we're going to look at the muscle cell in much more detail. So if we zoom in on these little things inside of here, what we start to see is that they're called myofibrils. So the myofibrils make up the muscle fiber. And there's this repeating pattern. So you can see this square box here is highlighting one of these sections, and then there's a section here and a section here. And then we'll take the section, we'll go up here, and this repeating bundle is called a sacromere. And this is where the contraction of the muscle happens. So you don't really need to remember this, but it's nice to know. So there's things called actin and myosin. And what the actin and myosin do is when there is a decision to move a muscle, there is a whole bunch of other things that happen from a neurological standpoint and from a cellular standpoint, but ultimately the myosin, and I'm going to see if I can make this a little bit bigger. You can kind of see here how it has this long section here, and then these little, what we call like little heads on the edges coming off. It kind of looks like a centipede. And then you see the actin here. So like if this is the myosin, this is the long filament part, and then the head of it. And what will occur is that these little heads of the myosin come up and they grab onto the actin, and they move and they pull the actin together. And then they'll let the actin go, depending on what type of contraction it is. So they pull them together, they can hold there, and then they start to move back. And so that is how contraction works. So it's really the action of the myosin and the actin at the sacromere level that makes this whole muscle work. And we'll go ahead and take a peek at a more realistic diagram. So we'll back out. So here's the belly of the muscle. So we'll just pretend we're looking at the same muscle, the bicep muscle. So this is a coating around the outer belly. And then, like we talked about before, actually what lays on top of this coating is the fascia. And then we'll come in, and I'll tilt this down a little bit so you can see. So here's our muscle bundle. Here's our fascicles. Here is, when we highlight this, this just shows you how the fascicles are arranged next to each other. And then you will, just getting a little bit deeper here. Then we'll come here, and here's the muscle fiber. And then remember, inside of the muscle fiber is where we looked at the myofibril and the sacromere. So you can see that this is a really pretty intricate network of muscular tissue that is actually making up the bulk of the muscle. And there's a whole lot of other things that we can learn with this and dive into, but for our purposes at this level of learning, this is pretty much the basics of what you need to know. So in the next video, we will look at how types of muscle contraction, and then also how we talk about muscles when they work together, and what are the terminology that we use to talk about that. We'll see you in the next one.